mum of 3 and my eldest son Jaska is 7 years old. Here he is. He's completely non-speaking and he has level 3 autism. Before becoming a mum, I never imagined that I would be standing here advocating for disability rights. If I'm being honest, I had no first-hand experience with autism or disability at all. To be quite frank, reforms like these would not have directly impacted me some years ago, but that's exactly what I want every Australian to understand. No one is immune to the possibility of one day knowing, loving, caring for, or even becoming someone with a disability. It's a club anyone can join at any time. So even if these reforms and funding cuts do not affect you today, they very well could tomorrow. That is why Australians must speak up now and protect our NDIS. We are taxpayers, and our taxpayer dollars should go towards supporting and protecting the most vulnerable members of our community. So here I am today, terrified that the people making decisions about autistic children and people with disability do not truly understand the reality that we live every single day. Terrified by the lack of understanding, empathy and compassion. Instead, we hear language from the Minister for Disability himself, Mark Butler, treating participants as mere numbers, as though reducing costs matters more than protecting disability rights, which are human rights. He often reminds the public that there was a life before the NDIS that he remembers very well. Yes, I'm sure many of you remember that too. A time where many people with disability were institutionalised, excluded, and left dependent on charity instead of recognised as people with rights. Support wasn't based on need, it was based on luck, where you lived, how wealthy your family was, whether your parents had the strength to keep fighting, whether services even existed in your area. And truthfully, many families are still living that reality today. So when we hear the Minister for Disability, the man who should be advocating for, supporting and protecting people with disability, speak casually about a life before the NDIS while announcing reforms to remove 160,000 participants from the scheme, shifting autistic children away from early intervention and into broader mainstream systems, of course people are frightened. And we have every right to be. Early intervention is not a luxury, it's a lifeline. These reforms are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they are real people, real children, real futures. Minister Butler often uses language implying autism is not severe, lifelong, or profoundly disabling for many individuals and families, and that contributes to a very important issue, where a system continues to minimise disability. Autism is not a quirky trend, and it's not something a child simply grows out of. Yes, autistic people can bring extraordinary creativity, joy, and perspective into our world. But for many families, autism can also be relentless. Sometimes it's a child screaming in distress for hours because they cannot tell you what's wrong. Sometimes it's driving around until midnight because movement of a car is the only thing helping your child regulate. Sometimes it's pulling your child away from danger for the 100th time that day because they have no sense of safety. Sometimes it's exhaustion so deep you no longer recognise yourself. Yet families are still expected to fight. Fight for diagnosis, fight for funding, fight to prove our children are still disabled enough for support. I know what it feels like to cry on the phone, begging to people to understand the severity of your child's needs, only to feel like nobody truly cares. They don't care. What's terrifying is that the future being proposed will make this process even harder. I recently attended a one-on-one briefing with Mark Butler to ask questions about these reforms, thriving kids and the future of autistic children as a lived experience voice. I asked, what happens to children who are misdiagnosed during the critical early intervention years? Children like my son, who was initially dismissed as just speech delayed, but now he's 7, level 3 autistic and completely non-speaking. How will thriving kids prevent other vulnerable children from missing access to the support they desperately need? Do you know what his response was? Well, the first point to make is, I'm not a clinician, I'm a minister, so I just knew how the meeting was going to go from that moment. Throughout the conversation, he repeatedly positioned Thriving Kids as a safeguard that would allow children to access support sooner, to which I asked, well, what happens when the public system, which is already overwhelmed, becomes even more flooded, when children are stuck on month-long wait lists without support? His answer, well, we're not really sure about that. Not really sure? Not really sure what happens when vulnerable disabled children miss critical developmental windows. Not really sure what happens to families already living on the edge of burnout. I asked what education, training or support is being provided to educators and teachers if these reforms plan to move autistic children away from specialised supports and into mainstream systems. Because a friend of mine recently completed her teaching degree and received 0 autism-specific training. His answer? Well, not enough, clearly. I'm surprised to hear that. I'll have to talk to the Minister of Education about it. I'm sorry. What do you mean you're surprised to hear that? This is your reform. Your decision to move autistic children away from tailored early intervention and place responsibility onto mainstream systems that are already overwhelmed and undertrained. I expressed my concerns that not only level 1 and 2 autistic children are being removed from the NDIS entirely, but funding cuts are still happening to level 3s. I explained that the language he uses around autism can lead us toward a frightening future where it's no longer recognised for the disability it is. I spoke about profound autism, the side of autism no one wants to talk about, children harming themselves so violently they require helmets, children living in constant distress, families breaking under impossible pressure. Do you know what he said? Well, I don't have that view. To which I said, and that is a privilege, because families like ours do not have the privilege of looking away. We live this reality every single day, fighting systems that demand more paperwork, more proof, more waiting. Minister Butler himself acknowledges that the issue with the NDIS is not disabled people, it's providers and businesses exploiting and rorting the system. And I said, I do not agree with funding cuts landing on vulnerable, innocent, autistic children instead of addressing that misuse. Do you know what his response to that was? It's been great chatting to you. I've got to go to another meeting now.
Butler's a dickhead.
Yes. The Clune family tragedy forced Australia to confront conversations about burnout, desperation, and the devastating consequences of families feeling abandoned by systems meant to support them. Funding cuts cost lives. Nothing excuses that tragedy, but refusing to acknowledge the realities many families are living only guarantees more suffering and silence.
My son died because of it.
When funding is cut and support disappears, their needs do not disappear with it. Autistic children and their families should not have to suffer just to prove they are disabled enough to matter. Studies consistently show that early intervention in the early years of life can significantly improve long-term outcomes for autistic and disabled children, including future independence and quality of life. Research also shows that children who miss out on intensive early intervention are more likely to experience higher support needs later in life. These reforms go directly against decades of evidence. Why cut lifelines during the exact developmental window science tells us intervention is most effective? It's clear these decisions are being driven by cost, sustainability, and reducing numbers on a spreadsheet. But autistic children and people with disability are not budget blowouts. They are human beings. And I am begging this government and the Australian public to listen to the people who are living this reality. The disabled community, the families, the specialists, the therapists, the evidence before more families are pushed beyond breaking point. As Morgan Freeman once said, attacking people with disabilities is one of the lowest displays of power I can think of. So remember this, Minister Butler, behind every funding cut, every delayed therapy, and every rejected application is a real child, a real person, a real family, and a future hanging in the balance. And now I'm going to let my son Jassy say a few words on behalf of other autistic children like him and his cousins, because being unable to speak is not the same as having nothing to say.
I'm autistic, but I'm also just a regular little boy. I'm not a number in a funding report. I'm not a budget cut. I'm not an inconvenience. I'm a child. A child who wants to learn. A child who wants friends. A child who wants the support needed to reach my goals and dreams. I have dreams for my future too. I want to communicate. I want to be understood. I want to contribute to society in my own way. But I need support to do that. My family needs support. Autistic children need support. Disability rights are human rights. Speak up for the children who cannot always speak for themselves. Please protect me. Protect us. Protect our own DIS, because compassion without action is just observation. And what you allow is what will continue. I deserve better. We deserve better. Thank you.